The reason I would encourage everybody to come out is because despite all the fear, the freedom that I have gotten as a out and proud gay man living with HIV/AIDS is nobody can take that away from me. When I'm in the closet, I'm always worried that somebody is going to out me, right? And I take away that power. I come out of the closet. Hi, my name's Ed Barron. I'm a native New Yorker. I was born and raised on the Upper East Side. I came out in New York in the early 70s. And living on the Upper East Side, I had heard about Christopher Street, but I was intimidated because that's where other men were. Lo and behold, I found myself more endeared to that community than any other aspect of our community, although I embrace all of us and the diversity that we all share. But I only knew one side of gay life in New York, and that was kind of the underground, the trucks, the piers, the anvil, the brambles, the tea rooms on the subway system. I went to school on 2nd Street, and I used to take the train from Bleecker Street to 68th Street, and it would take me hours because I would stop at every restaurant. Eventually I got caught, and they threatened to take me to my father who worked around the corner. I promised, oh, I'll never do it again. That's not the last time I'd say that. So they let me go. You know, I did the crying thing and everything. I went home and I changed. I went right back because back then you had passes for the subway, so it didn't cost anything. I wound up right back in that bathroom. I was insatiable. And the bathrooms at Orbach's on 5th Avenue and Hunter College. I had been fearful to go down the Village because I heard that that's where all sorts of kink and fetish stuff were. To find out that was where I'd find home. Anyway, so my family moves out of New York when I'm 17. This all happened before I was 17. We moved to Jersey. I kept going into the city, going to the Anvil and the piers and the meat rack and things like the Mine Shaft. There was actually a bar called the Toilet. And yes, it was a toilet. That didn't last very long. But that's where I found gratification. Thinking that I was accepting the fact that I was gay, but really just dabbing. I dated a girl and went to the prom with her, and as soon as I could drop her off, I was back on my way into the city. The Anvil had drag shows. The famous Ruby Rims would perform her I Will Survive. And then Uba, this beautiful black drag queen, would come out and she would do Grace Jones with a record on her hair and everything. So although I'd like to think that I came out in the early 70s, I had an incident with a dear friend of mine who passed from substance abuse. Michael, I love you and I miss you dearly. And he and I met, he walked into a meeting and I looked and I knew he was struggling. He looked at me and he knew I was struggling. And we used to go to the Sound Factory in the tunnel and all these dance parties, Club USA. And we'd party all night long and we would check in on one another and then we'd go back home and we'd sleep, and he had a disco ball and he turned me on to some really amazing music. Anyway, we're walking down, I'm meeting him on 6th Avenue outside of the Carnegie Hall one day, and Michael saw me and he had this big smile on his face and he came running up to me and he engaged me and he gave me a hug and a kiss, and I looked over his shoulder and he looked at me, he said, Ed, if you do that again, I don't know that we can be friends. And I said, what are you talking about? He said, you're totally disavowing my love and my affection for you. You're more concerned about Joe Blow walking down the street, what they're going to think about two men embracing, than you are willing to accept my love. And that caught me aback, because here I thought I was this out and proud gay man, and the closet door hadn't been fully opened until that point. And I'm grateful that Michael, and I'll never do that to another man again, and I never have. So thank you, Michael, for that. I miss you dearly. Got an apartment with my dad on 60th Street, and I was exploring. He worked nights, I worked nights, he worked days. So I would work until midnight, and then I'd go out and I'd go to the Little Irish pub and get drunk, and then I'd do the Brambles, or I'd go over to the Candle, which was on the Upper West Side, or I'd go to sleazy places that I knew, and that's how I fulfilled my sexual urges. So my drinking escalated, and I met a guy who took me to places like the Barefoot Boy and 12 West and Uncle Charlie's, and we were doing mushrooms. And I remember going to, I think it was Uncle Charlie's, and this young guy pops up from behind the bar with pink latex gloves up to his elbow. Can I help you, honey? And I freaked out and I ran running from the bar. I'm not like you. It reminded me of Boys in the Band. I'm not like you. I'm not like you. And I saw two guys leaving their apartment holding hands, and I went in and I pissed all over their mailboxes because I didn't want to be them. I didn't know what them was. All I know is I was afraid. I remember going to Gay Pride, the march, but I didn't go to the march. I actually took the subway down to 7th Avenue, Christopher Street, and walking down Christopher Street. I never made it to West Street because guys were hanging out on their fire escapes, semi-naked with erections, and they'd invite you up, and you'd go up, and you'd fool around on the 5th floor, but you come down to the 4th floor, and another guy would stand in his doorway. I never made it beyond 2 apartment buildings. But that was life in the 70s. There was no repercussions. If you got sick, you went to the doctor and you got a shot. You know, we had gonorrhea, we had syphilis. I didn't even remember hearing about chlamydia. Crabs were big. And that was the most embarrassing of all. Almost like gonorrhea and syphilis was like a passage of life. Things are getting hectic, and I can't keep up the facade anymore, and I know my dad's getting tired of it. I can't afford the rent because I'm spending all my money on partying. So he's going to give up that apartment. So I figured he's going to throw me out, so I joined the Navy. I go off to boot camp. But then I get stationed in Virginia, and we go out to sea, and we come back, and I go and I count some mescaline, and I go to the commissary, which has a well-known tea room, and I'm in there playing with this guy, and it turns out it's a sting operation, and they bust 36 of us in 18 days, everywhere from seamen, I was a seaman, to admirals, and they're going to discharge us. So when they take me to this processing center, I say, fuck it, and I eat the 2 hits of mescaline. I offer one to the guy I get caught with, but he's paranoid. And I'm like, I'm just here. They had me before my commanding officer, and they tell me if I say that it was a one-time incident, I'll never do it again, they'll let me stay. When I was home on leave, I had come out to my mother. I said, I got something to tell you, I'm gay. And she's like, well, I kind of knew. Doesn't mean I don't love you, but don't tell your father, because it would be an affront to his masculinity. So while I'm living with him before joining the Navy, it's like a secret. It's a secret I would hold on to until the day he died, even though he knew in his heart. I never had that conversation with him. They're going to discharge me, and they're going to give me a less than honorable discharge, and I say, no way, I'm a 4-0 sailor. So I write President Carter a letter saying I wasn't gay when I got here, still in denial. That it was only when you had me showering with these nubile young men that I started to have these feelings. Out and out lie. But it got me what I wanted. It got me an honorable discharge. I come back here, and I live in New Jersey for a while, and I meet this guy, and I think it's love. It's not. It's lust. We fight. He moves to Denver. We communicate. He invites me to come out to Denver. In the meantime, while I was living with this guy, my dad dies, and I'm the only one that can give him solace. He had a major heart attack, and he's in the Veterans Hospital on the Lower East Side. And I go out partying, and I come back at 4 o'clock when the bars close, half tanked. And I send the rest of the family home, and I just sit there and hold his hand, and that gives him some solace. And the nurses tell me that. So I feel like I've got some peace with my dad before he passes. Anyway, I meet this guy, or I'm living with this guy, in a burnt out shack. There's no running water, there's no electricity, we've got propane gas, we're bohemian. We have to go across the street to the 7-Eleven to use the bathroom and to wash up in the morning. While I'm living with this guy, my dad dies. And I'm supposed to stay in the city, but instead I'm going to drive home, and I do when he's having an orgy. So we had a confrontation, and that was the beginning of the end with him. So I go to this bartender, and he lets me crash on his couch with him. And the next morning, this god comes walking in, and he's the Castro clone. You know, it's 1978, 1979, something like that. And it's wintertime in Denver, so he's got on his bomber jacket, his ball cap, he's got the goatee going on, and he's got the red flannel shirt and the 501s with the lower button open, which means he's fucking available. I don't remember what color he was flagging, but he was flagging something. He goes into the kitchen, he comes out with a cup of coffee, he sits down, we engage in conversation. I look at him, I say, you know these guys? He says, yeah. I said, I'm gonna fuck you before I leave Denver. 6 months later, I'm living with him, and he became the only man that I was ever in love with. But he also had a problem with drugs. I wouldn't say a problem. We were experimenting with drugs back then. We didn't have a problem. And I remember he dealt with Quaaludes and Percodan, and I would come home and there'd be a tray of drugs out, and there'd be music playing on the reel-to-reel. It was oh so romantic. And he would be up in the bathroom, and he would come down, and there would be something different about him. One day I broke into the bathroom, and he was putting a needle in his arm. And he was embarrassed. And I said, don't be. I said, I want you to show me. And he said, no. I said, I'm 22 years old. I'll take responsibility for my own action. So he said he'd show me 3 times. He showed me once. I was like a fish to water. And that was it. That was it. That was my story for the next 30 years, off and on. I couldn't keep that needle out of my arm. Things got hot. People were coming from San Francisco. He was getting known as a drug dealer, so we decided to move. So we had a yard sale. I'll never forget, we had all these dummies out there dressed in different types of bondage gear with ball gags and harnesses and everything, and streamers going down to the street and everything. So we moved to San Diego, and we get to San Diego, and there is no downers per se. All there is crystal meth and cocaine, and this is where my drug addiction really takes off, because I start shooting crystal meth, and it's like 1984, something like that. And there's no syringe exchange or anything like that, so you have to take it back to your dealer. You can't buy them at the drugstore. So we were basically sharing needles. So I'm in San Diego, and things fall apart between David and I. He goes out and he gets dosed on angel dust, and he comes back and he's a wreck. And all I could do was lay there and hold him until he came down and tell him everything would be all right. But that was really the end of our relationship. But we held on for a while, and then it became bitter. We had actually signed a marriage contract. It talks about when two souls meet together and they join together and they call it love and they travel down a path together, there are going to be distractions along the way. And that's only natural. But if you find that you're no longer traveling down that path together, it is better to part in love than it is to, by staying together, you dishonor that love. Well, even though we signed that contract, we didn't adhere to it. We stayed together well beyond when we should have. I had earned his collar. He was a Leatherman, and I had earned his collar, and that was one of the greatest feelings I ever had in my life. And by putting his collar on, he had marked his territory. And he had taken me to the first annual fist fucker in Denver on a leash, and I was so proud, and he was so proud to have me as his boy. And we didn't do anything. We sold drugs and we went back to our house. And we actually went up to the park and we played around on that saucer thing in the snow. It was very romantic. It was very beautiful. I have vivid memories of my time with David. It was the happiest time of my life. And then AIDS hit. While I was in San Diego, I had moved down on my own, and I was tending bar at this shishi bar up by Balboa Park. And these two guys came in. They were from New Jersey, and they were very hot. And we decided we were going to get together for a 3-way. And I'm in love with these two guys. I'm also doing crystal meth. I fall in love a lot on crystal meth. Anyway, I moved back here, and the only business card I have in my wallet is these two guys. They had told me that they had a Victorian in Hackensack, which is not far from where we are now. And I go down there, and they say they'll rent a room to me. And I'm happy because these are guys that, like I had with Mark and Gary back in the early 70s, or the late 70s, before I moved to San Diego. I had this tryst going on, and it was fun. So I moved in with them, and they suggested I go get tested for HIV because they both recently tested. So I go to their doctor, Dr. Daniel Brooks on the west side, on West End Avenue, and I get tested. And I pretty much can assume what the test results are going to be, but it's different when you hear it. And I remember walking out of his office onto West End Avenue, and my life had changed. It was January 22nd, 1986. The reason I remember it was my 30th birthday. I'm 61 now. I've been HIV positive for 30 years, more than half my life. I wasn't supposed to be this way. I was supposed to be dead in 5 years. They lied. They lied about a lot of things. Anyway, John and I go out on the road and we're having wonderful times, but every time he goes out on the road with me, he winds up back in the hospital because we stay out. And Luke, his partner, is like, you're not going out with him ever again. Well, Luke isn't as strong as John. And Luke goes in the hospital on Friday and he's dead on Sunday. So I never even got to visit him. But John's a fighter. John is a fighter. Shortly thereafter, John starts to get sick and he has chaos, Kaposi sarcoma. And compound that with a seizure disorder and everything. And the lesions are bad. It's almost like Tom Hanks in the story of Philadelphia. John has to retire. Not because of corporate pressure, but because of his health. But he's selling high-end jewelry and he's got these lesions all over him. So it was only a matter of time. And I move out. I can't deal with it. And John gets a little bit worse and I move back in. And John continues to get worse. And I still can't face my mortality. And we're talking about before 4 days in February, so what about? I don't even remember. All I know is it was a heart-wrenching experience. And I can't deal with it. And I feel like I let him down as a friend. So John fights and he fights and he fights. And I remember before he got sick, when I was living there, I used to get up in the morning just to be like him, a successful businessman. And then I would come home and he was sitting, he had this beautiful Victorian with a wraparound porch, and he was sitting in a rocking chair with a yellow hoodie and dark sunglasses because he was suffering from vertigo. But I still couldn't be by his side. And John passed. I had 4 drug dealers sitting around my table trying to figure out who had the best crystal meth. So we had to sample all 4. And I had to go to work. And I remember driving up the back street to get to the hotel and I had keys, so I would go in the back door because nobody could see me, trying to put my tie on in this convertible and sneaking in the back. And then I'd be called in for board meetings and I was so paranoid I swore that my boss wanted to have sex with me and he was giving me eyes. And I would have to excuse myself because I would obsess about it and I wound up losing that job. So I went to stay with my friend and I woke up and he was putting a needle in his arm. It's like, I'm trying to get clean, you can't do this to me. So I leave and I wind up on the street for a couple of days behind dumpsters. But something's wrong physically. I start to develop this growth. But that doesn't stop me. I have a friend out here in Jersey City where I keep coming out, and when I have to go to Callan Lloyd Clinic in Manhattan, I stay at his place the night before so I don't have to deal with the commute coming back in. And I go to Callan Lloyd and they do biopsies and they say it's negative, but you got something going on there. And I decide I got to stop. I can't keep doing what I'm doing. So I call my sister and I say, listen, I want to come back to Jersey. She says, sure, you can live in my basement. So I come back out to Jersey and I reconnect with this center that I didn't think offered me anything. And I get into care and treatment and I go see a colorectal specialist and I'm told that I have stage 2 anal cancer. I thought it was warts or venereal warts or herpes or something like that. But it kept growing and growing. It wound up being the size of a $50 coming out of my rectum. But initially that didn't stop me from continuing to use drugs because I was an addict. So the doctor looks at the CAT scan, he says, oh, we're going to have to put a bag on you, we're going to have to cut you open, and it's not going to be an ileostomy, reversible, you're so too bad, it's going to have to be a colostomy for the rest of your life. And I'm like, no way, I'll do anything to avoid that. And I have an oncologist that says we can try. So we agree to a course of chemo and radiation, and I do my chemo and radiation, and I have a port in my neck, right? I'm a drug addict for all intents and purposes, although I stopped. I have the opportunity to shoot right into my fucking jugular, but I don't. For whatever reason, I don't. And I go through the chemo and the radiation, and the cancer is still there. And again, the topic comes up about colostomy. But I'm too sick, so they put me in the hospital for 28 days. And I'm over-medicated, so I'm hallucinating. I think there's an S&M dungeon in the basement of pictures coming to life. It's a story of a daddy and a boy. It's a real real beautiful story, but the one in the basement isn't so cool. And I'm calling people, and my dealer here in Jersey City calls my sister and says, "Have you spoken to your brother?" She said, "Yeah, we're concerned that he has dementia. We think the HIV is his brain." But we've come to realize I'm being over-medicated. But they got me strapped to the bed for 28 days, and they're going to cut me open again because now I've regained some strength. And the doctor comes in, looks at the CAT scan, and says the cancer is gone. Right now we're living in very harrowing times with everything that's going on politically and internationally. And I just wish we could learn to love one another, put aside our differences, because in reality we're all the same. About 10 years ago I was taken to AIDS Watch. We go down to Washington and we lobby on behalf of people living with HIV. Things like housing, the Affordable Care Act, and expanded Medicaid. And then about 5 years ago, I saw a movie called United in Anger, the history of ACT UP, and that's when I actually started to put it into my daily life. My activism has become a daily thing. I speak freely about the needs of my community, and I encourage everybody to come out of the closet and just learn to love one another. I'm in the city one day, and there's this viewing of United in Anger, the history of ACT UP. I see people like Peter Staley and Eric Sawyer and Jim Igo and Mark Harrington, and boy do I have a crush on Mark Harrington. I still do to this day, and he knows it. And I understand that ACT UP is still around. And now we have this new thing that we're hearing rumors about, this thing called PrEP, pre-exposure prophylactics, but it's not getting out to the community. So I go to my first ACT UP meeting at the LGBT Center on Monday nights at 7:30, and I meet these people, and I'm just in awe. I'm just in awe. And there's people from Vocal New York and Housing Works and the Zero Project and all these groups that are fighting to end the AIDS epidemic, and I'm alive. I'm alive. I've already done the Body Electric experience, and I've come to terms with the fact that I'm one strong son of a bitch. And so I go on my first demonstration. It's a protest over on 44th Street and 2nd Avenue. We block traffic. I get arrested with Mark Harrington and Charles King, who's the head of Housing Works, and Brad Hoylman, who's the state senator, and Wanda Hernandez Parks from Vocal New York. So I sit for 4 hours and I listen to these men who have been in the fight from the beginning, and I know I belong. I've found my place. So I become very involved with that though. Meanwhile, I've been going to Washington, D.C. with a group called AIDS Watch. Every year we go to Washington and we lobby Congress on behalf of people living with HIV and AIDS, about things like expanded Medicaid, about housing for people with AIDS, and the need for the Ryan White program. And I feel like I'm doing something positive. Instead of all those years where all I did was just run. And it's all because of things that I did with the Body Electric and the support staff that I get from my case manager. I do it because it's the right thing to do. In the beginning I did it because a sense of guilt and shame, because I couldn't be there for my friends in the early days of the epidemic. And today I do it because I'm alive. And it's only because of all the work that so many others have done. I've just started a class to become a a certified peer recovery specialist. My goal is to become a peer navigator, working with people that are newly diagnosed, or people that have fallen out of care, to see what I can do to support them. You know, I think all of us that have survived the plague years have something to contribute besides just sitting at home. I have friends that have started the Buddies program here, Kick-Ass in San Francisco, long-term survivors group at ACT UP. You know, today people test positive, and the big difference is today there's hope, right? In 1986, there was no hope. There was no Ryan White, there was no supportive services. You know, a friend of mine did one of these videos and he talked about the healing circle. I was there. Maybe he was the one that was, that was telling me that things would be okay. John, Luke, and I all went there religiously because that's all we had back in 1986, 1987, and even after AZT came on the market. So people today have so much more to look forward to. Not that I don't have a life that's worth living. I do, but it took me a long time to get here. So, that's it.